WGPR Detroit HD2.
You're watching WHPS, Highland Park, Detroit. The views and opinions expressed on the following show are not necessarily the views and opinions of WHPS, its affiliates, management, or sponsors.
Good morning, everybody. This is Mikael from Healthwise Enterprise, the health food store that's located at 3807 East 8 Mile Road, about 3 blocks west of Ryan, between Ryan and DeQuinta. It's a big parking lot between us and Long John Silver, and they said we can use their lot because our lot is small. We're there to service you Monday through Saturday from 10 to 7, and you can call us directly at the store at area code 586. 757 Again, that's 586-757 That's 3438. Our old number still works, 313-366 And if you want to text me, you can at 313-600-8532. I love to do one-on-ones, okay? And talking to folks one-on-one is nothing like it. I mean, virtual is good and telephone is good, but it's not like sitting down face to face with somebody, because communications, what is it, 7% words, 38% tonality, and 55% physiology, and you get that when you in face to face with somebody, and just feeling great, and that's what I want for everybody. Whether they want that for themselves, I don't know, but I get that idea from Jesus because he always saw the potential in you, okay, and he always saw the greatness in you, the God in you, and I thought that was a good. Jesus is a good mentor. I can follow along with what he's talking about. And his father, my father, God, provided us one of the most powerful nutrients for our body, free. It's called sunshine. And got to be put here, and it says, don't underestimate your need for this critical nutrient that's free, sunshine. And if you don't know what that means by now, that's vitamin D3. When your sun hits your skin, if you ain't got no protection, the so-called skin protection on it, the blockers, okay. See, in Africa, they use shea butter because it helps protect your skin from the burning of the sun, but still lets the healing properties of the sun get into your body. When you use them blockers, it keep you from burning, but you lose the benefits of the sun that's providing these health nutrients for your body. So it's about 30,000 functions that your body goes through every day, and vitamin D3 is involved in just about every one of them. I like to do both, the sun, which we can now get for the next 2 or 3 months, and but I take the supplement, and each one of our pills is 5,000 IUs, international units per pill, and I usually take 2 of those. It was Dr. Barefoot who told me back in 1999 about taking 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 a day, and I've been doing it since then. So what's that, 23 years. In a 2018 research called for an immediate revision of public health recommendations on the sun exposure, noting that, quote, non-burning UV exposure is a health benefit, and in moderation should be recommended as such. 4 years later, in 2022, the public is still being misled and misinformed about the health ramifications of sun avoidance, as there are significant hazards associated with vitamin D deficiency, including heightened risk of heart disease, several cancers, especially internal cancers, but also lethal skin cancer. Okay, because it never made sense to me. God gave us a sign, and you sit in the sign, you're gonna get cancer. Wait a minute now. We've been here for thousands of years, millions of years. Okay, humans at least millions, and sun, post getting cancer, that wipe us out. It would defeat the purpose of what God put us here for. Come on. It needs some protection. And I like coconut oil in the winter, in the spring and fall. And in the summertime, I like the shea butter because it's thicker, and I'm in the sun more, riding a bike, walking, talking, whatever. So this is just my choices, and it's working for me. Sensible sun exposure is the most effective way to optimize your vitamin D level. Sun exposure also has health benefits beyond vitamin D production that help lower your risk of chronic diseases and death. When you're deficient in vitamin D, it's vitamin D3, your health can deteriorate at a variety of important ways because your cells require, not optional, require the active form of vitamin D3 to gain access to the genetic blueprint stored inside your cells. You got a system set up by God, and you got to follow along with the system. You can't fool Mother Nature. An estimate 12% of all U.S. deaths may be linked to inadequate sun exposures, and sun avoidance is as potent a risk factor for death as smoking cigarettes. A couple years ago, I had ran across this worldwide study, and it said they could prevent 80% of the COVID deaths by people taking 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 a day, based on this worldwide study. And these two studies was in Chicago and Boston. I mean, there's other places around the world, but it said 80%, it's like for pills of the confidence, the vitamin D3, it's like 20 cents a pill. So based on this study, at Healthwise, we could prevent 80% of the deaths in Chicago and Boston for 40 cents. Oh, no. The powers that be can't handle that. Can't make no money off no 40%. And you're going to save 80% of the people? When they have plans to just, no, that's not going to happen. They just like, ooh. See, it's always been about the rich, the elites versus the poor. It's never been about black and white. That's a facade. Never been about all these different religions fighting over each other. That's a facade. And you fall for the okie doke. Okay, as long as the super rich can keep you fighting among each other, you ain't thinking about combining, because there's a million of us compared to less than 1% of the people who are making these decisions. And the threat is us getting smart and intelligent and binding together. Okay? So they wipe out our leaders. But it's in us. The leadership that leaders have, we have it too. To me, it's a matter of stepping up and believing in God to follow along with that leadership skills that you have. Okay? The research in questions published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health in December of 2018 called and wait a minute, I must have skipped something. I did. This original article came out February 11, 2019. A 2019 article in Outside Magazine highlighted the importance of sensible skin exposure, stating current guidelines for sun exposure are unhealthy and unscientific. Controversial new research suggests, and quite possibly even racism. How do we get it so wrong? Wow. The research in question, published in International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health in December 2018, called for immediate revision of public health recommendations, noting that non-burning UV exposure is a health benefit in moderation and should be recommended as such. Okay. I'm going to be in the sun, biking, riding, swimming, whatever. I try to keep the sun exposure for maybe 20, 30 minutes. Okay, and if I'm moving, then, it just got that sweat, and it's okay and stuff. But as long as I like coconut oil or the shea butter. Africa's been using the shea butter for years. The authors warned that public is being misled and misinformed about the health ramifications of sun exposure, sun avoidance, as there are significant hazards associated with vitamin D deficiencies, including a heightened risk of heart disease and several cancers, especially internal cancers, but also skin cancer. So that's what Dr. Barefoot's recommended was the 10,000 IUs, international units of vitamin D3 to prevent cancer. This was back in 1999. Vitamin D research demonstrated vitamin D is involved in the biochemical functions of nearly every cell and tissue in our bodies, including your immune system. Okay? Somebody put this lie about, more people getting colds and flus and pandemic. The vitamin D is key. When you're deficient in vitamin D, your health can deteriorate in a variety of important ways because your cells require the active form of vitamin D to gain access to the genetic blueprints stored inside your cells. A press release by Canadian Vitamin D Society noted, quote, the authors examined the current state of scientific research and found that severe sunburns are linked to an increased risk of melanoma, but non-burning sun exposure is linked to a reduced risk of melanoma. This is a message the public never received from current public health guidelines, states Dr. David Hole, leading author, Department of Public Health Science, Medical University of Southern Carolina. The public is led to believe that all sun exposure should be avoided and that the avoidance of sun exposure is free of risk from health perspective. This is not the case. We need the sun to be in our lives, to be on us. See, in Michigan, you covered up most of the time, so we need the sun. Indeed, the paper warns an estimate 12% of all U.S. deaths may be linked to inadequate sun exposure, and that sun avoidance is potential risk factor in deaths as much as smoking cigarettes. Somebody pointed out that back in the 50s, doctors made commercials smoking cigarettes. Okay? They did everything they could to convince the public that cigarettes was good for us. And it turned out that it was very harmful. And that's the same thing they're doing right now. Sun exposure guidelines put certain radical groups at risk. Important current guidelines, which recommend sun avoidance for all, are completely inappropriate for darker skinned individuals who not only are at far lower risk of skin damage from sun exposure, but actually require far more sun. Dark-skinned people require far more sun and therefore tend to be more prone to vitamin D deficiency to begin with. Black folks need more sun. That's what it calls the sun people. We need more sun. As such, it requires certain guidelines for far more harmful to certain racial groups. Issuing sun exposure guidelines that fail to take skin color into account is a really nonsensical and most definitely unscientific stance, yet it's the recommendations of most health organizations, including the U.S. Surgeon General, the American Academy of Dermatology, and the Skin Cancer Foundation. When asked why the recommendations failed to take into account skin types and color, Dr. Henry Lin, who sits on the Skin Cancer Foundation Photobiology Committee, foolishly and ignorantly replied that such information is irrelevant because vitamin D3 supplements can't address deficiency, according to Dr. Lin. Quote, "We want to make it simple as a public health message as to what the public should be reasonable, be able to absorb and understand. To fine-tune is just too complicated." Come on. But anyway, black folks need more sun. You got the message. Okay. But by oversimplifying the matter, dermatologists place a greater number of people at grave risk for vitamin D deficiencies, which may not be identified until health problems have already set in. What more, research suggests that most effective way to raise your vitamin D level is not through supplementations, but through sun exposure. See, we can do that because we got, May, we're in May, we got June, July, August, September. So we got like 4 months to get that sun exposure. But during them other 8 months, get the vitamin D3. I'm doing vitamin D3 every day, sun or not. Sun exposure benefits health in a made of ways. See, Oprah did a study back about 12 years ago. Her doctors had people taking 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 and no side effects. And Dr. Makota had reported on somebody, maybe a group, or doing a study, was taking 100,000 IUs of vitamin D3, still no harmful side effects. Sun exposure benefits health in made up of ways. In fact, sun exposure provides a number of health benefits over and beyond vitamin D production, all of which contributes to optimum health. Vitamin D merely is a surrogate marker for healthy sun exposure, as noted by Outside, this is a magazine. Quote, "A rough band of researchers argued that what makes the people with high vitamin D levels so healthy was not the vitamin itself. That was just a marker. The vitamin D levels were high because they were getting plenty exposure to the thing that was really responsible for their good health. That big orange ball shining down from above," end quote. The article cites research by Dr. Richard Welder, a dermatologist at the University of Edinburgh, who discovered a previously unknown biological pathway by which the skin uses sunlight to make neuroxide. Okay? A gas known to dilate blood vessels and lower blood pressure, among other things. Neuroxide is what they advertise this for, is love making. NO, Northwestern. Yes, nitric oxide, being exposed to the sun. Can you imagine that? Sitting in the sun has aphrodisiac. That's what it said right here in this article. Okay, Willard's research confirms that sun exposure, 30 minutes of exposure in the summer without sunscreen, raise particulate neuroxide levels and lower their blood pressure. It likely does this through the UVA and near-infrared frequencies. Quote, because of its connection to heart disease and strokes, blood pressure is the leading cause of premature death, diseases in the world. And the reduction was a magnitude large enough to prevent millions of deaths at the global level. This magazine Outsides writes in the ad, quote, were not all those raised also rates of skin cancer? Yes, but skin cancer kills surprisingly fewer people, less than 3 per 100,000 in the U.S. every year. For every person that dies of skin cancer, more than 100 die from cardiovascular diseases for the heart. Wow, 3 to 100. The relatively safety of skin cancer is hidden, however, by combining statistics for non-lethal and fatal skin cancers. The two most common types of skin cancers are basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma are non-lethal, and reported increase in skin cancer referred to increase in these non-lethal forms, not the melanoma. You can get this article from Dr. Mercola, Mercola. Outside, quotes, Williams says, when I diagnose a basic cell skin cancer in a patient, the first thing I say is, congratulations, because you're walking out of my office with a stronger life expectancy than when you walked in. How is that possible? You ask, because carcinoma are strongly linked to sun exposure, and sun exposure is associated with lower mortality and better health overall. Indeed, outdoor workers have double the rate of lethal melanoma skin cancer than indoor workers. As noted by Dr. Willie, the risk factor for melanoma appears to be in the immediate sunshine and sunburn, especially when you're young. While burning may cause your risk for melanoma, non-burning sun exposure to really important for optimum health and longevity, as noted by Dr. Waller in a scientific review of the evidence, quote, all-cause mortality should be the primary determinant of public health messages. Sunlight is a risk factor to skin cancer, but sun avoidance may carry more of a cost than benefits for overall health. Don't you just love it when they talk in circles? Sun exposure is good for the heart. Okay, that's what they were saying. Okay, maybe that's going to come with the next risk. Here we go. Avoid sun exposure is as risky as smoking. Getting vitamin D and smoking together. Completing evidence supporting the ideals that regular sun exposure benefits health and longevity was published in the Journal of Internal Medicine in 2014. In this study, led by Pili Linsky, senior research fellow at Switzerland Konosky Institute, the sun exposure habits of nearly 30,000 Swedish women who elevated in a 20-year long study, according to the authors, quote, we found that all-cause mortality was inadvertently related to sun exposure. The mortality rate among avoidance of sun exposure was appropriately twofold higher compared with the highest sun exposure group, resulting in excess mortality with a population attributed risk factor of 3%. The results of this study provide observable evidence that avoiding sun exposure is a risk factor for all-cause mortality. Following sun exposure advice that is very restrictive in countries with low cellular intensity might in fact be harmful to women's health, unquote. The take-home message of this study bears repeating. Women who avoid the sun had double the mortality risk of those who put regular sun exposure on the menu, as noted in Outside. Quote, there are not many daily lifestyle choices that double your risk of dying. And lack of sun exposure doubles your risk of dying. Wow. 2 years later, Linsky published a follow-up paper in which more than 25,500 Swedish women between the ages of 25 and 64 were again followed for 20 years. Details information about the sun exposure habits and confounding factors were obtained and analyzed in a completely risk scenario. Overall, women who got regular sun exposure did have a higher risk for melanoma compared to sun exposures, but again, they still had a lower all-cause mortality risk, likely due to their increase in vitamin D level. Women with active sun exposure habits have a lower risk of cardiovascular diseases and non-cancerous death compared to those who avoid the sun. Got to get the sun. I'm advocating to getting the sun and the vitamin D. It's so important. What's more, sun exposure was determined to be as a hazard as smoking. Because it can't make no money off you well and you sitting around in the sun getting all this free vitamin D. It can't make no money doing that, all right? Was more, sun exposure, sun avoidance was determined to be a hazard as smoking in terms of its efficiency on life expectancy. Vitamin D extend your life. That's the way I looked at it. Non-smokers who avoid sun exposure had a life expectancy similar to smokers in the highest sun exposure group, indicating that avoidance of sun exposure is a risk factor for death of a similar magnitude as smoking. Compared to the highest sun exposure group, life expectancy of workers of sun exposure was reduced by 0.2 to 2.1 years. Research shows sunscreen does not protect against skin cancer. Now, check this out. To make matters even worse, the vice to use sunscreen is also a shaky science on shaky grounds. According to the analyst by immunologist Marana Berwick, PhD, there's very little evidence to suggest that sunscreen use will prevent skin cancer. Okay? After analyzing a dozen study on basal cell carcinoma, which is typically non-lethal in melatonin, which is the most lethal form, Bedrick found that people who use sunscreen actually tend to be more likely to develop both of these conditions. Skin cancer. Only 2 out of 10 melatonin studies found that sunscreen was protective against these conditions. 3 found the associations either way, and 9 found sunscreen was protective against BCC. According to the feature study, the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, public sun exposure guidelines that advise against overexposure should be advised to specifically that it is sunburn that need to be avoided, not non-burning exposure. So you don't have to cook it to death. You don't have to cook yourself to death. 20, 30 minutes on one side, flip over 20, 30 minutes on the other side, get on out and take your shower. Put your coconut oil on, okay? Now, public health exposure guidelines that advise against overexposing should be revised to specifics that is sunburn that needs to be avoided. Now, not unburning exposure, and that the amount of exposure to get sunburn will vary depending on skin type. By being more specific, the needs of all racial groups should be addressed. So, what I was told that the white folks' skin is so thin. They spend 20 minutes in the sun, but the black folks' skin is so thick and juicy and black, they just stay all day in the sun. That's the kind of give you the protection. We just got to put some shea butter on so that you don't get burned. Okay, that's what I learned some 30 years ago. Vitamin D needs are underestimated by a factor of 10. They tell you to take 5 when you need 50. They tell you to take 100 when you need 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. Because if you give you too much vitamin D, you won't get sick, and you can't make no money when you're sick. Come on now. Vitamin D needs are underestimated by factors of 10. Wow. Please remember that sun exposure is the ideal way to optimize your vitamin D status. That's straight from Dr. McCullough. Not only does sun exposure on enough of your skin increases vitamin D3, but it also structures the water in your cells. She got structure. Wow. When the sun hits your skin, your body produces. Wow. That's a good thing. That's a real good thing. Please remember. Wow. Okay. Please remember that sun exposure is the ideal way to optimize your vitamin D status. Not only does sun exposure on enough of your skin increase vitamin D, but it also instructs the water in your cells. Metabolism vitamin A, so it can improve your immune function, increases neuroxidant, and most importantly will increase the vital importance antioxidant melatonin in your mitochondria to reduce optimal stress and preference your cellular energy production cells. That was a mouthful there. It is important that you do whatever it takes to work up to your 1 hour sun exposure every day. 1 hour, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on each side, 1 hour. If you don't live in an area where this is possible, I strongly recommend you use this as an excuse to move. Yes, if you value your health, it's important that's important. If you value your health, it is that important. Florida is a great option for many, as not only is it the sunshine state, but it is the state most committed to resisting tyranny. If you do not choose to supplement with vitamin D, understand it is far inferior options. You will also need to use Connect to Dr. Mary study considered at high doses, 2,000 international units a day, which is not only a high risk at all, in fact, it's completely inadequate for young people. Increased research has found a six-fold vitality in stored exposure, meaning one person taking 5,000 IUs of vitamin D per day may achieve a level of 20 milligrams per milliliter, while another is able to reach level of 200 milligrams per milliliter. 300 are treated. This is why it's so important to get your vitamin D levels tested at regular intervals. You simply cannot go by the dosage. In reality, you should take whatever doses required to get your vitamin D levels in your blood into a healthy range. He didn't say healthy range on here, but I've heard him say healthy ranges between 80 and 100,000 IUs of vitamin D3. He had this test. You could test the vitamin D in your body. He liked to keep his between 80 and 100. Now, I'm like to do that too. For years, he kept it at 60, between 40 and 60. But then he moved on up, and I moved right along with him. The next thing, I had to come back to that. It's just getting enough vitamin D and the reasons why. According to the study and the anti-cancer research, it will require 9,600 IUs of vitamin D per day to get a majority, 97.5% of the population, to reach 40 milligrams per milliliter, okay? Which research suggests is the very lowest end of the sufficiencies recommended by the Institution of Medicine. Okay, now this guy who put this together, so here we go, 9,600, I should say. That's what they said. Okay. We said 10,000 because the pills come 5,000 each, so 2 a day, and they're talking about 9,600. Wow, per day. When your blood has been tested and it's 40 milligrams per milliliter, that's a good sign. But Dr. Wiley like to keep his at twice that much, at 80. Okay. What is more, scientists, okay, wait a minute, skip the line. According to the study, anti-cancer research, it will require 9,600 IUs of vitamin D3 per day to get a majority, 97.5% of the population, to reach 20 milligrams per milliliter. Which research suggests is the very low end of sufficiency. That's a far cry from the 600 that the government recommends. 600 IUs. That's a joke. But it goes along like with the vitamin C. I think for years it was 60. I think it may be 90 now. You know, you can't go to a health food store and get vitamin C under 500. We had the 1,000, and then there's ester vitamin C, which is even 4 times stronger than the original. What's more, scientists have shown 20 milligrams per milliliter, which is virtually considered the cutoff for sufficiency, is still grossly inadequate and dangerous to health. For optimum health diseases, you need a vitamin D level between 60 and 80 milligrams per milliliter. Once you get above 60, the risk of cancer and other chronic disease decline dramatically. In the case of breast cancer, by more than 80%. The VITAL study and other like it simply did not give participants high enough doses to get them into a protective realm. The reason why public health has been misled to the issue of doses stems from a simple mathematical error that has never been corrected. As pointed out in 2014, the IMO actually underestimated the need by a factor of 10 due to the simplified mathematical error. If this error is calculated were to be correct, the official IMO recommendation would actually be 6,000 IUs a day, not 600. Okay, so you got a little backup. According to the data published by the Archives of International Medicine, 75% of American adults and teens are deficient in vitamin D3, based on significant levels of 30 milligrams per milliliter. If significant cutoff levels were to be moved up to 40 milligrams per milliliter, deficiency rate in the U.S. would likely be in the higher 90 percentile, just taking it up 10%. Even with a significant level of 30 milligrams per milliliter, 97% of African Americans and 90% of Mexicans Americans are deficient in this critical free nutrient, which place them at increased risk of economic diseases, chronic diseases. Remember, it is best to optimize your vitamin D levels with sunshine and not use swallow it. How much vitamin D can you make and when? Our skin pigmentations are linked to ancestral latitude proximities that optimize our ancestral skin for sun exposure. The further from the equator our ancestors live, the lighter their skin, according to them, to biological maximize the limited visibility of the sun and UV light exposure. Yeah, okay. It's like we all sent here by God. We chose to come here by God, and we got the different skin color because it depends on the regions of the earth where you are with the sun. If you in Africa, and your sun exposure all the time, you want to keep covered up. Okay, but we live in Europe, and the sun is only just 3 months. Covering it up is not a good thing. Remember, your body produces vitamin D through exposure to UVB light. For those living in northern latitudes, this may only be an option for short summer months each year. As a golden rule, you have to live below 22 degrees latitude if you want to produce any vitamin D at all during the summer. The chart below displays the likelihood of vitamin D sensitivity through the U.S. by month. Interesting chart. Well, we in Michigan, which is the golden, so we're right there in the middle. Okay. I think we got this last line we can get through. Prioritizing non-lethal melatonin is ill-advised. For decades, the concern over skin cancer, most of which are non-lethal, had taken the front seat. As a result, over far more serious chronic health conditions such as depression, heart disease, and internal cancers that claim far more lives than melatonin, which now has been allowed to propagate. It's high time we straighten our promises. The evidence of vitamin D3 optimization is overwhelming, and because all the more compelling when the blood level is the primary parameter using measures and tricks and tracks. Okay. Overall research supports the idea that higher levels offer greater cancer protection, and even higher, as high as 91 or 100 milligrams per milliliter, provide safe and beneficial. Importantly, having a sperm vitamin D level of 60 milligrams per milliliter has been shown to positively impact anyone with breast cancer or pregnant woman and lactate woman. Wow. 60 milligrams per milliliter. I just can't get out of my head the 10,000 and why the vitamin D is so important. And then God has given us free and all these benefits. In short, recommendations to avoid sun exposure at all costs is inadequately killing people while saving very few, if any form, deadly melanoma. Outside magazine likes it to the public health recommendations to take saturated fats, for trans fats. Public health policy has been found to have killed millions by causing the very problem it's aimed to prevent. Remember, the only way to ensure vitamin D sufficiency is to get tested and then get sensible sun exposure along with significant high doses of vitamin D3 if needed to get you into 60 to 80 milligrams per milliliter. It's time for the U.S., Canada, and other nations acknowledge the scientific backing sensitive for sun exposure. Recommendations as is those by the Australian Cancer Institute, which states, ultraviolet radiation from the sun has both beneficial and harmful effects on human health. A balance is required between excess exposure, which increases the risk of skin cancer, and enough sun exposure to maintain adequate levels of vitamin D3. It should be noted that the benefits of sun exposure may exist beyond the protective of vitamin D. Other possible beneficial effects of sun exposures, including reduction in blood pressure, suppression of autoimmune diseases, and improvement to the moods. That's all, folks. On that vitamin D. We have it at the Healthwise, getting a bottle, and it's like $250 in the bottle. You just take 2 a day, so for one person, it's going to last 4 months. A month supply, I think, is like $12. Now, couple minutes here. Last year, I hinted at possibility leaving WHPR because I've been here 21 years. And I heard from one person. Thank you, brother. But a friend of mine told me how I could possibly do both. Okay, while I'm here doing WHPR with this beautiful background, I can set a probe or something, and have a YouTube channel. So I'm doing twofer. So I'm looking into that, and gonna get my shows, and because it's 11 on YouTube right now. I didn't know, but a friend of mine told me about it. I said, okay, cool. So I want to get more exposure that folks can get the information, and maybe not for free. But I would love to help folks get the information and apply the information, because that's the key. Knowledge we grew up was power. What we found out in Healthwise, we twerked it a little bit and said applied knowledge is power. Okay, and that's what we're looking for, is folks to make that change, and for folks to tell other people. Okay, because we can continue doing a service, because it's a community effort. Okay, this is our source of getting information that could possibly change our lives. Not just from me, it's from God, and just using me. And not just me, but the other folks at Healthwise that volunteer to get the information to our community. So we don't have to be suffering in all these. I mean, did I bring it? Yes, I did. This here, the Civil War, this is my personal, so I got it written all up, but just, Wayne told us that all cold starts in the eyes. And when you spray at least twice a day, some people sprayed at least 10 times a day, and the eyes blink real fast because all it takes is a miss. And 2 times up your nostril. And then I like to take a real deep breath to get it deep into my lungs, into my throat, esophagus, all of that, because they tell us that colds and flus and viruses, etc., like to grow in the respiratory system. So Civil Water, they tell us, kills the germs, fungus, and bacteria, viruses, mold, and yeast, because they all have one thing in common. They one cell, which is a foreign substance in the body. And the silver sees that foreign substance and it kills it by paralyzing it. And after 21 days, it dies of starvation. Now, when you see the jets in the air and it's a stream, but it's constantly disappearing, okay, that's cold air and all that. But when you see the jets in the air and then they leave a string and it don't disappear, it seems to get wider and wider. So we have a beautiful sunny day. Next thing you know, we got all these chemtrails. When they fall down, we breathe it in and gets into our eyes. Civil Water to the rescue. Okay. So we're going to come up with ways to expose the information that is given to us to give to you, and hopefully you can share with other folks so we can make a difference, because these folks got some plans for us. So we're going to have some plans for them, because we got God on our side. So thanks for tuning in, and most importantly, for sharing the information with our brothers and sisters. Peace and love, y'all.